welcome to another episode of Shire Travels. In this one, I'm going to be talking you through an amazing trip we did on the Ghan. So if you don't know, the Ghan is a train railway line that runs right through the centre of Australia from Adelaide in the south up to Darwin in the north. And it stops by Alice Springs, which is around about the centre of Australia. So we did this trip in May 2015 and it is quite amazing. When I was looking through the pictures to realise that that's almost 10 years ago, I feel like I aged about 30 years looking at the pictures. And May was a great time of year to do it. So that's kind of heading into their winter months up north. So it was nice and sunny during the day, kind of warm enough, low to mid 20s, but at night it was actually pretty cold. So we did this trip because, funny story, I actually won the tickets to go on the train through a Facebook competition. So there was a travel agency in Melbourne who ran a competition through Facebook. You had to be the last person to comment on their post before they said stop, and then you were the winner. And it was 2 tickets on the Ghan in their red service, which I'll discuss more shortly, and then a tour around Alice Springs, Uluru and Kings Canyon area, and then another tour up in Darwin. So it left from Darwin, went to Litchfield and also Kakadu as well. And I was like, I am going on this trip. It sounds amazing. Right, I'm gonna go for it. And pretty much just every time I saw that someone else had commented on Facebook, I was right onto it and I won, which was fantastic. As I said, red service was their budget, their no frills option. It was kind of the option to, if you wanted to say you went on the Ghan but you didn't want to pay the price of gold or platinum service, this is kind of what you did. Like I said, it was one carriage full of seats, another carriage which had food and drink that you could buy, and then basically the luggage carriage was behind the seated carriage, and in there was a toilet. So I think from memory, when I had looked up at how much the tickets actually cost, because I was just curious to see how much they were worth, I think they were around about $600. So our ticket was from Adelaide to Alice Springs. We then stop in Alice Springs for a week because I believe that's how often the train would go through, and then we would carry on up to Darwin a week later. So we flew to Adelaide from Melbourne, and I think from memory we just got a taxi to the train station, and they had a whole special section for the Ghan. The Ghan itself, the train, can sometimes be over 1 kilometre long, so it's got its own kind of infrastructure rail station there. So we checked in, they tagged our bags and loaded them onto the train, and then they've got a kind of an area where you can sit, have some food and drinks, and also buy some merch. So we got a couple of Ghan stubby holders. Then it was time to board the train, get our seats. From memory, I don't think it was set seating, we could just kind of sit wherever we wanted. So red service was one carriage, a whole heap of red seats, and they were set out 2 seats, an aisle, and then 2 seats. They were quite wide seats and they could recline back. If you put your bag under your feet, you could kind of lie straight-ish. I think from memory they had provided us with blankets and pillows as well. It wasn't the comfiest way to travel, but it was still pretty good. We got there in the end in one piece. Then there was a dining carriage which had very basic menu. We pretty much just got nachos, and you could also buy drinks there as well, so we got a couple of drinks. So from Adelaide to Alice Springs, it took us pretty much a whole day on the train to get there. We did stop off in Marla for a few hours, so I think the train got in there maybe about 1 AM and it stopped and was there for 7 or 8 hours. This is the spot where it was quite funny. You could really tell the contrast between the red service and everyone else on the train. We kind of got out and had our chance to stretch our legs outside, and then we were kind of corralled back onto the train. And you could see everyone from Platinum and Gold service having their champagne breakfast, heaters out, umbrellas out. It looked really beautiful. We were just kind of walking around in the dirt just to stretch our legs, which was quite funny. But you get what you pay for. Or in our case, what you don't pay for, what you win. So the train ride itself was actually quite interesting. It was a very different way to travel and see the country being on a train for that amount of time. So in the carriage with where you could get food and drinks, they also had commentary that you could kind of sit by a speaker and it would play a commentary about where you're going through and the history of the Ghan, how it was constructed, all that sort of stuff, which was actually really interesting. And then once we got there, our luggage was all unloaded for us and we just got a taxi to a hostel in Alice Springs. It was about a 5-minute walk from Alice Springs town centre. I remember we had to cross over the Todd River, which I thought was quite funny because it's only a river for about 2 days a year when it floods. Apart from that, it's just sand. And this was our first time going to Alice Springs, and it was quite funny because everyone that we had told, you know, we're going to Alice Springs, we're going to Darwin, everyone said, oh, you'll love Darwin, it's great, but oh, Alice Springs, you know, it's a bit dodgy and all this. Now, every town has bad spots, has a bad reputation. I know recently, 2024, there's been issues in Alice Springs, but from our experience back then, it was fine. We actually had the opposite feeling. So we thought Alice Springs was great. Everyone we met there was friendly, said hello. Darwin, on the other hand, granted we stayed on the main strip in Darwin, but even going out for dinner, it was just carnage. It was just drunk people everywhere. Lots of very drunk English and Irish backpackers just roaming the streets causing trouble, and it was quite funny to look back and see what, you know, we had this kind of preconceived idea in our head as to what we would like, and actually it was the complete opposite for us. So before we joined our 3-day tour, that was part of the prize that I won, we decided to do a 1-day tour with a company, I think they were called Emu Tours, and it was to the West McDonnell Ranges. So the West McDonnell Ranges are to the west of Alice Springs. It was an all-day tour that we did, and the first main stop that we had was at Simpsons Gap. And while we were there, we ended up in a photo shoot for Northern Territory Parks and Wildlife Department and had to pose for a couple of photos and pretend to be very interested in something a ranger was telling us. Simpsons Gap was very pretty. We were probably there at the wrong time of day. I think if you were there and the sun was behind you, it would probably look a bit nicer with the rocks all lit up. Next, it was on to Stanley Chasm. Again, if you were there in the middle of the day, it might light up kind of like the Kinder Chasm at the Bungle Bungle Ranges in WA. It was still very beautiful to see. They had a few ghost gums there as well. Next stop was Ellery Creek Big Hole. This kind of is what it says on the tin. It's a big hole of water. I believe it's a permanent water source all year round. Really pretty to look at, especially with all the reflections on the water. Then it was on to the ochre pits, and it was really interesting to hear how ochre is used for different ceremonies and how far and wide it's also traded. Next it was on to Ormiston Gorge to have a bit of lunch. This gorge has a permanent water source in it and also has a huge big sandy beach area. There's also some walks you can do high up to the cliffs to look over the gorge as well. And then our final stop for the day was Glen Helen Gorge. Now at the time we visited, this was quite well set up in terms of having a campground, a shop, kiosk, and also helicopter flights as well. I believe in the past 10 years since we went, it's been taken over by Discovery Parks, and it's now actually shut down because of issues they had with their water. We chose to pay extra and do an optional helicopter flight over the gorge. And this was amazing. This was my first time going in a helicopter, and to see it all from above was just fantastic. Mom then decided to take a dip in Glen Helen Gorge afterwards, and from what I'm told, it was freezing. So we had one more day before our multi-day tour. So we joined a day trip with APT Tours. This went out to Hermansburg, which is an Aboriginal community, a church and a museum with a bit of history on, I think, missionaries that came out there and how it was established. And then we went to Palm Valley. So this involved driving down the Fink riverbed, which was quite interesting in a huge tour bus. I think driving along the Fink River, we actually saw heaps of wild horses there. Palm Valley itself was really stunning. It's definitely somewhere which kind of flies under the radar. Beautiful ghost gums that grow there as well, which I hadn't really ever seen before. And then as well as that, Palm Valley, there is a type of palm tree that grows there, and it grows only there in abundance. And it's very strange when you're looking around at this very, very dry desert landscape, and then there is just a load of palm trees there. A little bit strange, but really interesting to see. Definitely worth a day trip out there. We also saw some small wallabies there as well. So then it was time to join our multi-day tour. So we drove, we got picked up from our hostel and we drove straight out to Uluru. That was where we were going to stay for our first night. So driving out to Uluru for the first time was amazing. I think if you've driven out there, the first time you see it, it really is amazing. The very flat, kind of barren landscape. And then suddenly it rises up, this bright orange rock kind of in the middle of nowhere. It's so much bigger than what you kind of anticipate it is as well. And it really is amazing to see. It was really exciting to see it for the first time. And when we got there, they took us to the camel farm that they've got there. And I did a little camel ride going around in a circle. First time riding a camel. It was great, can't complain. Then we did a guided tour of Uluru just for, it must have just been an hour. We only walked out to a couple of sections of Uluru. We didn't do a whole walk around the base, but we got to see the area where there's a permanent source of water and then some Aboriginal art as well. So that was really exciting. We then stayed at Ayers Rock Campground and we were going to be sleeping in swags. Now I have never slept in a swag before. I'm English. My husband Tom, he's Australian. He's slept in a swag many, many times. So he didn't think anything of it. He was trying to explain to me kind of what a swag was. And I think ones that he had, it's just like a very, very small tent. So it kind of covers your head. The ones that we were given, it was just more the canvas bag where you can, if you want to, if you're not claustrophobic, zip yourself up inside. Now I hadn't really thought about the logistics of it. I had a shower before I went to bed, washed my hair, so my hair was soaking. We put all our swags around the fire and I'm trying to like dry my hair in the fire. It's in the sand. Because we're in the desert and it's getting into winter, it was so cold. And in the night, the wind picked up, so my head was just freezing. On top of that, there were wild cats everywhere. You would, look to one side, all you see was little eyes looking at you, they're reflected in the fire. And then on top of that, there were dingoes howling all night, and all I could think was, maybe this is how it ends. I just freeze to death in this swag and then my frozen carcass is eaten by dingoes. But I survived the night, did it, ticked that off the list, slept in the swag, done. We did sleep in a swag the next couple nights as well, and it wasn't as traumatic. In Ayers Rock Campground meant that we could watch sunset at Uluru as well as sunrise. So sunset was fantastic. We went to, I think it's the main sunset viewing area and got ourselves all set up. Took a whole heap of pictures. And the next morning we woke up very early, very cold, and watched sunrise, which was really good. They had like a special wooden platform with a few benches and stuff like that where you can go. We were joined by every single other person in the campground. It was a bit of a fight trying to get a nice spot where you could kind of set up, particularly if you wanted to do maybe a time lapse or something like that. It was a little bit of a scrap. But nevertheless, we saw the sunrise. It was fantastic, very beautiful. Then it was straight on with the tour. So we headed straight to Kings Canyon from Uluru. Got there, it must have been pretty early. I reckon we would have got there maybe about 7:30. And we got there so early to try and beat the heat and beat the other tour routes basically. Anyone who's been to Kings Canyon knows that the very first section of it is a ridiculously steep climb up. After that, it's pretty easy going. So doing it first thing in the morning out of the heat was a really good choice. So we did the rim walk around Kings Canyon. We also went down into the canyon to, I think it's called the Garden of Eden at the bottom. And it was really beautiful seeing there's water and plants and trees all growing in the center of the canyon. It was really stunning. We really enjoyed the walk. Would definitely recommend it and would do it again. So that night we stayed at, I'm pretty sure it was Kings Canyon Resort or Kings Canyon Campground. Again, slept in swags, but it wasn't as traumatic. I'd kind of got over it by then. And the next morning we went and did the Valley of the Winds walk out at the Olgas. And this was fantastic, a really, really good walk. If you've been there before, you know the bit where you get all the way up to the top and you can see the valley and the winds coming like straight through there. It was really, really beautiful. From memory, a pretty easy walk as well. After that, it was actually back to Alice Springs, so our tour was over. The tour as well, it was quite a kind of a hands-on tour. So you help set up the swags, you help cook the food and wash up and all those sorts of things. And one final tour that we did on our last day in Alice Springs was just I think it was a couple of hours out to a cattle station, so a working cattle station, and it was a quad bike tour. So we hopped on a quad bike each. They do a bit of a test at the start just to make sure you can drive, in that you literally go in and out of a few cones to make sure you can steer, and bless, there were some people on our tour who really struggled with that. And they take you all around the station, they tell you kind of day to day what they do, how it works yearly, how they get the cattle in, where they go. Really, really interesting. Even if you think that sounds quite boring, why would I be interested in it? It really was fun, and having a burn around on a quad bike for a few hours was really fun and we enjoyed it. Then our time in Alice Springs was over. It was time to hop back on the Ghan and head up to Darwin. So on the way, they have a stop at Nitmiluk National Park where you can pay extra, so it's not included in your Ghan ticket. You pay extra to do a boat cruise along Katherine Gorge at Nitmiluk National Park. We opted to do this and it was really, really good. It was definitely worth the extra money. It was the first time that we got to see freshwater crocodiles, which was really exciting. And the gorge itself was really beautiful. They had a tour guide there as well who talks you through the history. There's also some movies that were being filmed there, so they were telling us all about that as well. And it was definitely worth paying the extra money to do it. So if you are going on the Ghan, 100% recommend doing that off-train excursion. So we got into Darwin. I think we spent one night at a hostel in the city and then it was time to get on our tour. So once we had our itinerary, met our tour group, we all got to know each other. There were actually a couple of people who had been on our tour with us in and around Uluru and Alice Springs who were on this tour as well, which was quite good. A couple of German girls who were really nice. So we started off the tour and we went to the termite mounds. These are huge, really tall termite mounds, and not something which I was, it wasn't on my bucket list to see a giant termite mound, but there we were and it was very interesting. For this tour we stayed at Kawinda Lodge and we stayed in kind of permanently set up safari tents, which compared to the swag, it was luxury. It was great. Had a little camp bed in there, somewhere to put our clothes. That was pretty much it. So Kawinda Lodge is where you do the Yellowwater Billabong cruises from. We were booked to do a cruise. It must have been the one that was just before sunset and it was fantastic. Absolutely everyone who goes there says how good the cruise is throughout the Billabong, seeing all the different bird life, but most importantly seeing all the saltwater crocodiles. And I kind of thought, would we see a crocodile? Like, will there be that many? Oh yeah, there is so many. They are naturally very aggressive creatures, so they see the boat coming and they're like, right, what is this? Who are you? Come like right up to you. You can get the boat quite up to them as well, and then they very slowly sink down. It was amazing being there for sunset. We got some fantastic photos, this one in particular, of the croc swimming just in front of the sun as it set. It's one of those kind of pinch me moments of just like, wow, this is so amazing. The next day on the tour, we drove out to Jim Jim Falls. So Jim Jim Falls the road had actually just opened when we got there, which was great. We were in a kind of a four-wheel drive off-road tour bus, and the road in was pretty terrible. It does take quite a long time to get there. I think from Quinda Lodge it might have taken just over an hour. And then the walk to Jim Jim Falls, it can actually be quite difficult. So the first part is kind of a formed path, but the last 100 meters or so, you are boulder hopping pretty much. And then you get down onto a sandy beach, which is just so unexpected. So you have a beautiful sandy beach, the water to the side, and then to get to the waterfall, you kind of have to swim through, or if you're on the other side, you boulder hop around to this huge kind of cavern area where the water flows down. When we were there, there was a little bit of a waterfall coming down. You see pictures of it in the wet season and it is just crazy. So after our time at Jim Jim Falls, we had a bit of lunch and then we headed on to Yabia. So this is in the northeastern section of Kakadu National Park, and it's a really popular spot for sunsets. So it looks out over, I think it's kind of a floodplain and escarpment. It's very, very green, so it definitely gets a lot of rain. There's a whole heap of Aboriginal rock art to see on the walk up to the lookout, which is fantastic. It was really, really interesting to see all the different art and look at the read the interpretive signs to tell you what they mean. After Yabia, we went to Cahill's Crossing. So Cahill's Crossing is a very famous spot to watch saltwater crocodiles feeding. So there is a causeway or a road that runs through the river, and when the tide changes, it brings in all different fish, and the crocodiles sit there literally with their mouth open waiting for fish to come in. Now, when we were there, like I said, this was quite a few years ago, there wasn't any sort of lookout. It was just you kind of stand near the road on the rocks. Nowadays, they've got a proper lookout section to try and stop tourists going down to the water and standing there to get their pictures, or were standing on the road. Next, it was on to Litchfield National Park. Our first stop on the tour there was Florence Falls, which was really beautiful. So it's got two smaller waterfalls that come together into a deep pool, which is actually full of fish. It is probably one of the most popular places in Litchfield National Park, so expect there to be crowds, expect there to be lots of people there. Then it was on to Wangi Falls. This is a really, really beautiful waterfall. So it's two waterfalls and a huge pool at the bottom, which from memory had quite a sandy bottom. It wasn't too deep when you first go in, and then you can swim out all the way to the waterfalls. Really beautiful spot. It has been closed quite regularly in recent times due to saltwater crocodiles being present. Once our tour was over and we were back in Darwin, we went out for dinner with our tour group before everyone said their goodbyes. We had a couple of days before we headed back to Melbourne, so we checked out the World War II Museum. We also went to the underground oil tunnels as well, which was very interesting. Also had a look at the wharf, which features in the film Australia, and got caught in a tropical storm, which was pretty fun. So would we do the Ghan again? I reckon we probably would. Maybe when we're a bit older and can afford to do the gold or the platinum service, where you've got a proper bed and your own bathroom and lounge area. They also have fabulous food and drinks in their kind of dining carriage. It's such a unique experience. It's a shame they don't do the red service anymore, but if you could afford to do one of the other services, I would say definitely do it. It's just such a unique way to see the country, and it's a unique way to get to kind of different stops. So getting to Alice Springs, Nitmaluk and Darwin, and then doing tours from there, kind of like what we did. So if the train's coming through once a week, you give yourself a week in Alice Springs, for example, to explore the area, take in a few different tours, and then head up to Darwin and do tours there. We would definitely go back to the Red Centre. There's quite a few sites that we want to see again, and there's some new sites such as the East McDonnell Ranges that we want to go and see. In terms of Kakadu and Litchfield, definitely want to go back. There's plenty of places in Litchfield that we didn't get to see either. There's the Cascades, I think there's Green Ant Falls. There's a whole host of different places that we didn't get to see. We definitely want to go back to. There's also places like Mataranka, Bitter Springs, all these little stops and places that we'd like to go back to as well. So that's a wrap on our trip on the Ghan. It was a really unique, once in a lifetime experience. It was also quite incredible the fact that it was a prize with the tours as well. That was such a good get, such a good win. If you have any questions or comments, please let me know and I'll see you in the next one.